The Departed, directed by Martin Scorsese and released in 2006, is a thriller concerning an undercover cop and a mole in the police attempting to identify each other whilst infiltrating an Irish gang in South Boston. I wanted to like it, but just couldn't bring myself to do so. Where to start with The Departed? I've dissected and dismembered this movie with friends and relatives since its release in so much detail that I feel drained even before I begin this review. I have a funny relationship with this film. Despite pretty much enjoying all of Scorsese's previous output and being a huge fan of crime movies, I can't say The Departed really resonated with me. At first I hated it. Then I warmed up to it, and then I went back to thinking it just wasn't very good. After it had finished when I first saw it, I just thought to myself, well, is that it? There was no initial excitement when watching and no lasting impact after it was done. As sacrilegious as it is to say, is this Marty's first boring movie? I've actually seen The Departed more than any other Scorsese movie. These have been a series of failed attempts to work out just what the world sees in this film in order for it to justify its Best Picture win at the Oscars, its 85 out of 100 Metascore and its general well-liked status in the movie world. The Departed is a remake of the 2-year-old Hong Kong hit Infernal Affairs, a superior film in my opinion, and concerns an undercover cop, DiCaprio, in an Irish mob in Boston and a mole in the police force, Damon, to attempt to weed each other out before they themselves get caught. It's 20 minutes into the film before any of this happens, or even the title appears for that matter. Before it does, we get something of a prologue with Irish mobster Frank Costello, played by Jack Nicholson and based off of real-life Irish mobster Whitey Bulger, narrating about his environment. The Knights of Columbus, JFK and black people. It's the only narration we get throughout the whole movie, and immediately after the Rolling Stones' Gimme Shelter is unleashed at full volume, accompanied by short and slightly fragmented scenes of violence from Costello's heyday and DiCaprio and Damon's introduction into their fields of play in the film. It's all a bit disorderly and has an amateurish feel to it, as if someone told a random fan to make a short Scorsese movie and they proceeded to throw all the cliches at the screen. DiCaprio.
May he rest in peace.
Narrations. Gimme Shelter. People getting shot in the back of the head. Lengthy tracking shots.
The whole 9 yards.
Says Police Captain Queenan, played by Martin Sheen, would say. If I was to find a rational explanation for the way the opening of the movie feels so detached from the rest of the film, I'd say it's because the start of the film showcases an older time, a previous generation. It was a time more wild and animalistic where the only surviving character of that environment is Frank Costello. It reminds me of Gangs of New York and the opening battle sequence, where the only person to come through the endeavor was Bill the Butcher. Everyone else involved in the battle had either died when the film's main story happened or took their place in the new world of order and stability. Somewhat, order and stability. It's why the Butcher sticks out so much in the movie. Not only because of the terrific and wild performance by Daniel Day-Lewis, but because he is essentially a caveman in an insurance salesman's world, and towards the end of the film even he knows he has no place in the new ever-changing America. Similarly, Jack Nicholson's Costello comes off as someone who belongs in a different time away from the tuxedos and police warrants. It's not only him though. Many of the characters in The Departed come off as lions and wolves used to roaming the wild, trapped in suits and behind wooden desks and piles of paperwork. The jarring pacing of the film was a real problem for me. I had no sense of how much time had elapsed over the course of the movie, and the one time a character had the chance to explain, he merely shrugged.
Long time. Long fucking time.
Which I agreed with completely. With a runtime of 2.5 hours, the movie is unable to match the brisk pacing of, say, Casino or Goodfellas, and instead comes across as a dozen or so clumsily put together scenes in which characters talk tedious topics to each other, with the odd frame of unadulterated violence garnished in. I'm serious, while watching a Scorsese mob and cops film I was actually checking to see how long was left because I was so bored. There is no tension throughout the movie at all, which made me unresponsive to scenes that were clearly meant to shock and awe. The dialogue is often vague and meaningless, and only of service when it is used to forward the plot. Take the scene between DiCaprio and Nicholson at the dinner, where they talk about DiCaprio's father, school, sadness. All until I thought to myself, what the hell are they talking about? To which, to my amazement, DiCaprio responds by asking,
So what the fuck are we talking about here?
Yikes. The ambling and dreary nature of the movie might have been elevated by some decent acting. But despite the cast including Leonardo DiCaprio, Alec Baldwin, Matt Damon, Mark Wahlberg, Martin Sheen, Ray Winstone and Jack Nicholson, it pains me to say the performances were shambolic. DiCaprio was shaking, shrieking and squirming so much that it made Costello look like an idiot for not realizing that he was the rat in his crew. Damon looked like an awkward schoolboy as the villain of the picture. Sheen seemed to be attempting to say his lines without spitting out his fake teeth.
Microprocessors.
Winstone decided that the shooting schedule was the best time to start experimenting with every accent known to man, and Wahlberg's profanity-fueled, nostril-flared cop with little man syndrome was so irritating that I hoped he would get shot in the head or thrown off a building. Ironically, he's the only major male character that survives the runtime. Nicholson was the best of the bunch, bringing weight to his role where his presence is felt throughout the whole movie in spite of him playing an extension of his Joker/R.P. McMurphy characters. But even he, it seems, is somewhat sleepwalking his way through the film, only waking up for the odd rat impersonation here and there. And nobody is buying that Boston accent for a second. Sticking with the actors, something about the way the movie was shot makes it feel self-conscious as to who's in it. I can't quite put my finger on it, but as an example let me say that I knew that Matt Damon and Mark Wahlberg would have a fist fight as soon as I realized that both were cast in the film. The camera often stays wide enough so that two A-list can fit into the frame, like the scene at the dock with Nicholson and Sheen, or the initial bar scene with Jack and Leo. It's like the filmmakers are screaming at you, look, Jack Nicholson and Leonardo DiCaprio in the same movie. Aren't you blessed? It's things like this that made the film feel as though it takes place in a movie world and not the gritty urban real life as it tries very hard to show us. Scenes lead nowhere, and as already stated, there is no tension. Why are these characters doing this? Where are they going now? What is happening here? It's as if Scorsese is aware you've seen all the cop dramas and is not going to use up runtime on things that he thinks you've seen, and instead wisely uses it on scenes where the mob leader doodles naked nuns or someone says fuck really loudly. Speaking of which, the profanity in this movie is horrible. Aside from Nicholson, the cast come off as cringe-worthy when spewing out filth. Don't take me wrong, I am aware the language is supposed to be vulgar and not elegant, after all, these are street gangsters. But swearing on screen takes a little swagger, something that most of the cast lacks, which made them seem like teenagers trying to sound cool in front of their friends. Try and stay awake, Jack. Only a couple of more scenes till you snuff it. Editor Thelma Schoonmaker adopted a frantic style that didn't sit well with me. Some cuts ran for a split second and we were constantly jumping from scene to scene, camera angle to camera angle. Maybe it was supposed to come off as sharp and gritty, but it just felt unprofessional and clunky. Maybe substituting Scorsese's coked-up direction, which undermined any possible nail-biting from me, for a more subtle but equally stylish director would have been better. I always thought the plot to The Departed would fit snugly into Michael Mann's filmography. Most of his movies concern two men on different sides of the law, and in this case he'd have the third dynamic of Frank Costello to use. Or even a fourth if Queenan was made into a more major character, as was the initial intention when Robert De Niro was slated to play him. And don't get me started on the plot holes. This movie is plot hole Las Vegas. It's plot hole galore with The Departed. But I'm not going to go into that, otherwise we'll be here all day. All I can say is the plot feels so flimsily put together that even as a standard Hollywood thriller with a forced happy ending it still doesn't work. And neither does the horrible-looking CGI blood effects which killed any possible thrill the movie could have had in one of its most pivotal scenes. I was too distracted by how crap the blood looked to take notice of the fact that the main character had just been unceremoniously shot in the face dead. Are we really supposed to believe that of all the counselors in the city both the rat and the mole fell for the same one? Or question what use Costello is as an FBI informant when he is clearly the biggest fish in the sea? Or how nobody realized that DiCaprio is the rat despite being the only one with a past in the police academy and the newest addition of the crew. And what's with all the flip phones? And why does Wahlberg commit a murder right in the middle of... Wait. I said I wasn't going to speak about the plot, so I won't. I can hold it. I'm mature. I can keep it in. Yes, I can. I can. Do it, Leo. Kill him. Then kill yourself. Yes. There are some positives. Quite a few, in fact. But the problem is that most of the good stuff was already present in the original movie Infernal Affairs, which, at the age of 4 when The Departed was released, begs the question as to why Scorsese's remake even needed to be made. And it's pretty embarrassing on the Academy's part that the guy who made movies like Taxi Driver and Raging Bull finally won an Oscar for this film, but who cares about awards anyway? All in all, The Departed is not going to become one of my favorite movies. Far from it. It remains an oddity in Scorsese's filmography in the sense that it's pretty much his only movie that I dislike. Plot contrivances, bad acting and hyperactive editing can all be forgiven, but when a film is boring it has committed the ultimate celluloid sin. In my book anyway. My rating. A very generous 6.